right, hey, welcome to Terra Nova. My name is John. It is great to see you guys here for part 7 of an 8-week series called Revelation. And you know what that means? That means in 2 weeks, we're kicking off a brand new series called The Unsettling Solution for Just About Everything. It's a series that really is about exactly that, the solution for just about everything, everything in your life, everything in your relationships, everything that's going on in our world right now. And it is very much an unsettling solution. And it is very much the perfect series for the Christmas season beginning in December, and a perfect series to be inviting people to. So be thinking maybe about somebody you can bring with you as we kick off a brand new series in 2 weeks. But today, as I said, is part 7 of our series, Revelation, The Victory of the Beautiful Resistance. It's a series about one of the most well-known or maybe most talked about books or referred to books in the Bible, the book of Revelation, a book that most people would say is one of the most confusing books in the Bible. I think one of the most misunderstood, and honestly, for a lot of people, the most unnerving book in the Bible, a book that's often treated as like a code book, like a secret code book, or a crystal ball for the future, like a play-by-play of the end times. And it's been fueling speculation and suspicion of government and conspiracy theories for generations. But we've been saying, just to clarify, that this document is actually a letter. It's a letter written by a guy named John that you may have heard of before, St. John, the Apostle John, the same John that wrote one of the biographies of Jesus' life. It's a circular letter written to 7 churches in the Roman province of Asia, where John has been living for the past couple of decades in and around the city of Ephesus, which is the capital of that province. And it's a letter that is written to real people that he knows. Real people in real churches facing real tribulation, and he's got a very personal, very applicable message for them in and around the year about 95 AD. A letter written to real people, but in a very unique style for us, in a genre called apocalyptic literature, which is what makes it so strange, because apocalyptic literature was this very common, popular genre of like visions and journeys through time and space and the heavens, and like this bizarre, fantastic, cryptic imagery and symbols that was at its time pretty much the most popular style of literature of its day, which means the people who originally opened this up to read it, they would have got it. They would have understood this style of literature. They would have been like, sweet, this is amazing. I'm loving this. And it really is an amazing document. But to give you the backstory real quick, times have gotten really difficult for followers of Jesus in the Roman Empire as the movement has been spreading, especially under the Emperor Domitian, who prefers to go by the title our Lord and our God. That's how he likes to be referred to. And it has been particularly difficult in the Roman province of Asia, where the worship of Rome and the worship of Domitian is taken really seriously. In fact, they've just built a very large, very beautiful temple to Domitian in the capital city of Ephesus, and they are all about it, which is probably why John finds himself banished at this point in his life to the island of Patmos, as the governor of Asia is trying to shut him up. And there he has the prophetic insight to see that as bad as things are, they're about to get worse. And that the churches and the people that he loves and has been caring for a few decades now, they are not ready. They are not ready to be the beautiful resistance, the victorious, beautiful resistance that will bring the nations of the world to the Messiah and the rightful Lord of the world. And it turns out that some are really good at the resistance part. They're nailing resistance, but they're not very beautiful. They've actually lost love, which for John is the whole ballgame. That's it. And then there are other churches that are really good at being beautiful. I mean, they've got like the grace love thing. That's really great. But they're not very good at knowing what to resist and how to resist it. They're caving, they're capitulating in ways that are impossibly incompatible with living lives of real truth and reality in God's world. And so John has this vision of Jesus where Jesus is calling them, these churches, to be victorious, to be Nike. That's the Greek word for victory, to be victorious, to overcome, to conquer. And then the rest of the letter is written to give clarity and perspective and vision and inspiration and fuel that they need to be the victorious, beautiful resistance. And in scene after scene, John is taking them and us behind the curtain of reality to the unseen spiritual realities where God is at work in history in events that might look like they are out of control. Things are not as they seem. He seems to keep saying, things are not as they seem. And the first two scenes after these messages to the churches are really the most important of them all for understanding the book itself. The scene of one being on the throne who holds in his hand the scroll of history, and then the scene of a lion who turns out to be a lamb. And it's this tectonic, plate-shifting, power-flipping vision of God's conquering Messiah as a sacrificed lamb with its throat slit, covered in its own blood, who conquered his enemies by dying for them. It is conquest by sacrificial death, which isn't really a thing when you think about it. Never had been a thing, at least until now. And then we find out that the Lamb's followers actually conquer the very same way that just as the Lamb, who's referred to as the faithful witness, told the truth and lived the truth about God and reality in the face of the lie until it cost him his life, so too his followers. We too, like him, are faithful witnesses, but the shocking revelation, the real twist in the story, is that his sacrificial death and theirs is not losing, it's actually #winning. They are that's victory. That's what conquering will actually look like. That is how the beautiful resistance will be victorious. And as crazy as that sounds, it turns out, week 5, we talked about this, it actually happened. That's how the followers of Jesus won. The blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church. And so we're told in the scene that we looked at last week that the followers of the Lamb triumph over him, referring to this red 7-headed dragon that represents Satan. They triumph over him by the blood or the life of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony or witness. And they did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. And here's a question for you. What do you do with people who can't be threatened by death? That's pretty much the worst thing we got against people, right? What do you do with people who would rather die than live a lie? How do you manipulate them? What do you throw at them? What can pull their strings? How do you threaten them? And the answer is, those kinds of people are very, very dangerous. Well, then the scene of the dragon and the two beasts last week ended with this description of economic and social pressures being put on Christians that were refusing to take this mark of the beast on their forehead and their hand, the mark which is the name of the beast, which would have been a symbol of their allegiance to and their worship of and their identification with Rome and with the worship of Rome. And then the scene shifts from the beast and his mark to the Lamb. Chapter 14, and then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him the 144,000 that we met in chapter 7, week 5, who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And they follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and no lie, no deception is found in their mouths. They are blameless. In other words, there are those who live their lives marked by the name, that is the character and the personality of the beast, and there are those who live their lives marked by the name of the Lamb and his Father. And it raises this question for all of us. Which mark do I wear? What's on my forehead? What name do I wear? What character and personality marks my life? And then the letter ends with this dramatic juxtaposition, this dramatic kind of side-by-side contrast between two women, which represent two cities, which represent two ways of being. The first city, the first woman we meet is Rome, the beast and the systems of power and oppression and self-gratification of this world, and the dragon that they all represent. And then there's God's pure and beautiful vision for humanity flourishing in a community of wholeness and justice and peace, and all creation flourishing alongside of it. And John is taken in two visions to see these two women, both of whom are cities. And the first woman he's taken to see is beautiful. She's immaculately groomed. I mean, dressed to the nines, dressed to kill, you might say. She's powerful, she's rich, and she is the goddess Roma in all of her glory. But rather than being the divine mother goddess, the eternal Roma dressed in her modest toga that would be worshiped in temples all over the Roman province of Asia, this beneficent goddess of great virtue and esteem and military strength and protection, what John sees is actually a high-priced hooker. He sees this high-priced prostitute drunk out of her mind, sleeping with all the kings of the earth, intoxicating the nations with her maddening worldview. Revelation chapter 7. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came to me and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters." And once again, for the first century churches, as they're sitting around reading and discussing this document, there's no question about who sits on many waters. Rome ruled the seas. That was their thing. In fact, they referred to the Mediterranean Sea as Mare Nostrum, our sea. They ruled it. They owned it. And with her, John goes on to say, the kings of the earth have committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth, referring to provincial rulers and client kings that ruled many of the provinces of Rome on Rome's behalf, including, for example, Judea, where Jerusalem was, where the Herods, like Herod the Great or Herod Antipas, where the Herods had ruled as kings, but as puppet kings to Rome itself. And it's this vision of her corrupting influence on many different political powers. With her, the kings of the earth have committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth, which is this code phrase we've talked about frequently that John uses throughout the Revelation for people who've bought into the lie. People who've bought in all the way, invested in, and perpetuating that dysfunctional, anti-human, anti-community, anti-God approach to life. And John's looking around, he's like, these people it's like they're all drunk. Like everybody drank the Kool-Aid, right? They're so bought in, they can't even see how messed up it really is. And then, after he said, "Let me show you," then he carried me away in the spirit to a wilderness. So the backdrop of this vision is a place of barrenness and death, which in biblical narratives and biblical stories is the opposite of the garden where life flourishes and is abundant. The wilderness is a place of barrenness and death. So that's where he goes. And there I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names, claiming to be God or like God, and 7 heads and 10 horns. So immediately we recognize this as the beast from before, because we were just reading that a few minutes ago, sitting in this living room in the first century. And the woman was dressed in purple, which is the color of royalty. In fact, in the ancient world, you couldn't just wear purple because you liked it. You had to be royalty to actually even wear it. It's the color of royalty, and purple and scarlet, and she's glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. And so she's like the epitome of luxury and wealth and conspicuous consumption. In fact, she's drinking out of a gold goblet, but this goblet she's drinking out of is filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. And so like just beneath this beautiful, luxurious surface is like something that's disgusting and ugly. And she too has a name written on her forehead. And as it is for all of us, it points to her true identity, her true character. The name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And this language of mother, it's an intentional parody on Rome's public story that the whole world was indebted to Dea Roma, to goddess Roma, who is like the divine mother of the golden age, who has given birth to the emperors to bring us the golden age. And John is like, well, actually, Roma is really the mother of prostitutes and of abominations, like all of the atrocities of the earth. And John calls her Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great, a line taken from Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4, as Nebuchadnezzar is looking out over his empire filled with pride. Is this not the Babylon, the great city I have built? And Babylon refers to his empire, the empire of Nebuchadnezzar, which was the first empire to destroy Jerusalem and its temple in 587 BC, like 600 or so years before John writes this letter, who took untold numbers of citizens into captivity and into exile, including the prophets Daniel and Ezekiel, who lived out their lives as prisoners of war in Babylon. But by this time, that word Babylon was like a code name that Christians like Peter, for example, used for Rome. Peter, who's writing in Rome, calls the city he's in Babylon, but it's more than Rome. It's more than that, because Babylon has become an archetype, if you will, for all of the oppressive, arrogant, violent, anti-God, anti-human, anti-community governments and powers. Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of all of the atrocities of the earth. And then I saw that the woman was drunk with blood, with the blood of God's holy people and the blood of those who bore the testimony of Jesus. And then something happens. This is really a common feature in all apocalyptic literature. There's this conversation with the person who's seeing the vision and the guide who's taking him. And so there's this conversation John has with his angel that leads us down a bit of a rabbit hole. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. And the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction." And immediately we're like, well, that actually sounds like a little bit familiar. It's almost like that threefold phrase that John uses 7 times in the Revelation to refer to God. He is the one who was and is coming. But this is like different. There's a twist, because whoever this is or whatever the beast is, it was and is not and is coming out of the abyss and going to destruction. And those in those first century churches, again, they would have recognized right here that Nero myth that we talked about last week, Nero Redivivus, this idea that Nero, who had, by the way, killed hundreds of Christians, brutally, publicly, violently, including Peter and Paul. Nero, who had killed Christians in Rome by the hundreds, had kind of become a symbol of Rome's true colors, of the ugliness and violence of Rome. And there was this legend that even though he was dead, he was going to come back. And he was going to maybe lead a revolt against Rome. There was this very common legend that he wasn't actually dead. And so it's kind of like John's almost saying the empire, like Nero, who is a symbol of this, is not the eternal benefactor worthy of all of our gratitude and our public acclaim, our glory. In fact, it's a beast from the abyss who's headed for destruction. And the inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, they will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This, verse 9, calls for a mind with wisdom, which is a line used earlier to set up a similar kind of explanation about the mark that we talked about last week. A mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Now, this is straight up a direct reference to the city of Rome. It is as clear in their day as a reference in our day to the Big Apple would be. What's the Big Apple? It's New York. You know that, right? How about this? What's the Big Easy? New Orleans, right? What's the city of angels? City of sin. Vegas, right? Windy City. Chicago, a little up right there. Yeah, so we know these things. It's like, we know that language. Well, Rome was the city is set on 7 hills. In fact, members of this community could probably reach into their pocket and pull out a coin with Vespasian, Domitian's father, the Emperor Vespasian's face on one side, and on the flip side is the goddess Roma reclining on 7 hills. That's Rome. Okay, like simple enough. But now it gets a little muddy, and the image starts to change. They, the 7 heads, he says, are also 7 kings, or to be translated kingdoms. And 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is yet to come. But when he does, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to destruction. Okay, like, wait, what? So like the last time, John said, hey, this calls for wisdom. Just like that time, he's tying together the symbolic evil of Nero, the identity of the beast, their current emperor, the 8th emperor Domitian. But just like the last time, it's kind of fuzzy. Doesn't quite add up. Like there's more going on than just that. And there's so many things at this point that really could be and possibly are actually going on. There's like layers to this. So on the one hand, there was a way of counting that was very common in the Hebrew scriptures that kind of went like, there are 6 of these, even 7. There's 7 of these, even 8. It's like adding 1 to the number you were saying. That was kind of figuratively and emphatically talking about the total of something, but then like intensifying it. It's like putting exclamation points on it. And so though he could be speaking of literal Roman kings, 5 and 1 and 1 to come, or literal Roman emperors, the counting's all off. Because Domitian is the one Domitian's the 8th. By any kind of counting, that's like not including the 3 posers after Nero. But Domitian's the 8th, not the 6th here. But then again, the use of the number 7. Well, that's always curious. That's always conspicuous because 7 is highly symbolic. It's like the complete number or the full number of things. And by the way, so is the number 6. Highly symbolic. It's the number of man. It's the number of completeness. And here in this lineup, Domitian would be number 6, like the mark. And so like Domitian is this symbol of man's imperfection and man's incompleteness, but at the same time, then he would be saying, there are more to come. It's not going to end here. There are 7, even 8. Like it will get worse. But at the same time, kings are often figurative for kingdoms. So John could actually be referring to the beast-like nature of many kingdoms, not just of Roman emperors. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, 5 have fallen. 1 is, which would be Rome, but Rome is not the last. There will be more to come. And here's the thing, given how John does this with symbols, how he like layers things on top of layers, symbols with riddles and multiple implications, wanting communities to tease them out and talk about the implications of each one. Could he mean like all of the above? Is he referring to it all? Quite possibly, but here's the point. Whatever the multivalent, which is the term they use to refer to these images that seem to have more than one reference, whatever the multivalent images are specifically intending to point to, if at all, his point is actually crystal clear. That the beast, and in fact all beasts, all of the arrogant, violent, oppressive, anti-God, anti-human, anti-community beasts, no matter how eternal or how invincible or how intimidating they appear at the moment, they are all temporary. They all remain only for a little while. All are going to destruction. That is the point. And then the angel continues. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not received a kingdom, but for 1 hour they're going to give their authority to, he hasn't said that yet. For 1 hour they will receive authority as kings along with the beast. So here we have those kings of the earth, those puppet kings, those rulers, those local rulers. And 10, again, is like a symbolic number. It's the total number of things. There were at times more than 10 provincial kings in Rome, sometimes maybe fewer. But here's the point. Note this again, for 1 hour. For 1 hour, for just a moment, they're going to receive authority, and they have one purpose. They will give their power and their authority to the beast, and they will wage war against the Lamb, which most certainly seemed true for the followers of Jesus in these churches. That is exactly what the local provincial rulers were on behalf of the beast, waging war against the Lamb. But the Lamb will triumph over them because He is actually Lord of Lords and King of Kings, titles which the emperors loved to apply to themselves. The king over many other kings, the Lord over many other lords. And he's like, no. The Lamb is actually the true Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and with him will be his called and chosen and faithful followers. And then comes the surprising, but not so surprising turn in the story. This unforeseeable scene, especially in this moment at like pretty much the height of Rome's power and invincibility. It turns out that the empire and the kings do not actually love Dea Roma. They do not love Rome, and they are not faithful like the Lamb's followers are. The beast and the 10 horns you saw, they will hate the prostitute. They will hate her, and they will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. On the one hand, a stark contrast to the luxury with which she is draped at the moment. But also, he's quoting here the prophet Ezekiel, who's actually talking about his own people and how they've abandoned God. Will leave her naked. They will eat her flesh. And burn her with fire, which is exactly what Rome, and especially Nero, had done to many followers of Jesus. For God has put it in their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. It's like this ironic end to the story that the beasts, that these kings, these vassal kings, the nations that Roma, the prostitute, is riding on, she's riding on their backs, feeling all invincible and eternal, will eventually turn on her and destroy her. It's a powerful image that evil turns on itself. Evil implodes on itself. Evil self-destructs. Greed and hubris and violence always have self-caused consequences. And maybe that's part of what he means when he says God put it in their hearts. God put it in their hearts like, this is the way God created things to be. Fish swim in the water, birds fly in the air, people become like what they worship, and evil self-destructs. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword, which, just as a side note, in 410 AD, is what happened to Rome. A vassal king, a chieftain of the Goths named Alaric, led the Goths to sack Rome. In a week it fell. Then he goes on, the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. And then after this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, and he had great authority, great power, and the earth was illuminated by a splendor like the sun coming close to us. And with a mighty voice he shouted, fallen is Babylon the Great. Quoting here Isaiah chapter 21, she has become a dwelling for demons, a haunt of every impure spirit, of every unclean bird, of every unclean and detestable animal. And right now he's riffing Isaiah chapter 13, where Babylon is called the jewel of the kingdoms, but then it's left this desolate wasteland and only jackals and like wild goats live there. Only John has kind of amped that up a little bit, that all that lives there now is demons and like impure spirits and detestable animals, for all of the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. And in this vision that continues of the final judgment of Babylon, John is taking language from dozens and dozens of references in the Hebrew scripture from Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel and Nahum and Micah, like over and over again. And by the way, he doesn't have a Bible. He's got it all up here, and he's working it through, and in fact, reworking and reapplying images that are related to the fall of Assyria and the fall of Babylon, the fall of Tyre and Edom, and even Jerusalem itself. And John sees Rome as simply the latest version of this thing called Babylon, this archetypal thing of humanity and human systems and governments in rebellion against God, usurping God, pushing God away, forming nations that exalt themselves and exalt their military and economic strength into a false God that they put their trust in, inevitably taking advantage of and oppressing others along the way, filled with hubris and their own megalomania. And this is not something that's just limited to the past that he's talking about. It's certainly not something that's going to happen just in the future that he's talking about. It is a portrait of human systems. Political, economic, religious systems and power gone wrong, beginning with the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, which is the origin story, not only of Babylon, but of all that Babylon represents. And like it was for John, and like it was for Peter, who described himself as living in an exile, as an exile in Babylon, just like them, it's all around us. Babylon is everywhere. It's all around us. It's where we live too. And throughout the Revelation, John has been building this case against Rome, against Babylon, exposing the dark truth just beneath the surface of her glamour and her benevolent propaganda that she announced to the world as good news for the nations. And John has been building his case, these marks, if you will, of the beast. And there are 7 of them, 7 marks of the beast. The first one is this: usurping God. Usurping God. Beginning with that origin story at Babel, Babylon is always displacing the one true God. Displacing the one true God and his ways for flourishing in human life and community, and replacing it with the worship and the autonomy of self and my own personal, well-being and self-made security, and ultimately replacing it with the worship of the state. How quickly nationalism defaults into a kind of false god of the state. How quickly political leaders become somewhat godlike in our imaginations. This is what the blasphemous names on the beast are all about, this usurping of God. And this is at the top of the list because it then cascades into a host of other dysfunctions that probably would never happen if the first one hadn't happened. And the second one is this: arrogant hubris. Arrogant hubris manifested in her sense of international superiority, better than all of the other nations, her sense of invincibility as she rides on the backs of the nations that she subdued. And John, in Revelation 18, he's riffing on Isaiah 47, which is puts this brilliant spin on what Isaiah is doing in Isaiah 47 as he describes the prostitute Roma in Revelation 18:7. In her heart she boasts, I am enthroned as a queen. And where is she enthroned? On the top of this beast, on the top of the nations and the peoples that she subdued. I am enthroned as a queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn. I will never experience loss. Invincible, untouchable, superior, just like Nebuchadnezzar looking out over his city. Is this not Babylon the Great? Arrogant hubris. Then number 3, spilling of innocent blood. Spilling of innocent blood. And not just Christian martyrs, as John builds his case, by the way. There are tens of thousands who have been and are being, and we're going to be violently killed to expand and defend Rome's so-called peace. And so in Revelation 18:24, he says, in her, in Rome, was found the blood of the prophets and of God's holy people and of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. The bloodbath under Nero of Christians, the destruction and slaughter of the inhabitants of the city of Jerusalem, that, John says, that's Rome's true colors. It likes to talk about being this place of peace, but its so-called famous peace is just a foil for its bloodthirst and its violence, and many people knew that. Then number 4, of course, conspicuous consumption, like this excessive consumption, as John describes Roma as this high-priced prostitute, right? And she's glittering with gold, and she's draped with purple and scarlet and jewels, bedazzled, pearls, got this golden goblet. Or like in chapter 18, for a few verses between 11 and 13, there's this lengthy discussion of all of the goods of the world that were brought to Rome. You're reading like well, what's up with that part? What's he doing there? All of the goods of the world that were brought by the world's merchants into Rome. And Rome was a lot like the Capitol in the Hunger Games. Ever see the Hunger Games? You know what the Capitol was like? This just conspicuous consumption, this excessive consumption, where the wealth and the resource of the districts were being stripped from them, flooding into the Capitol, which just gorges itself in excess while the rest of the population struggles, even the people who live where the resources were taken away from. And in fact, the Roman historian Tacitus, writing about 10 years after John writes the Revelation, quotes a British chieftain named Calgacus, who calls the Romans the robbers of the world. They are the robbers of the world. Quite different from being this benevolent, peace-giving dictatorship. They are parasites, he's saying. And the flip side, of course, of excessive consumption is always economic exploitation. Economic exploitation, economic injustice. Calgacus and Tacitus goes on to say, to violence, plunder, and theft, they give the name empire. They make a desert and they call it peace. And here, John's critique of Rome is pure Old Testament, pure Hebrew prophets, where the prophets again and again, or you might say God is promising through the prophets again and again and again, like any human system, religious, political, economic, does not matter. Any human system that exploits the weak and vulnerable, that uses people because they can, that treats human beings like commodities, that mistreats the poor to pad the pockets of the rich. Any government, any system that does that will meet with God's justice. Exploiting, and then number 6, perverting the nations. Perverting the nations. While they import all of the world's goods, what they export is their immorality, their corrupting influence on all of the nations. All of the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. Or as John says in Revelation 18:23, by your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. Now, this is something that's actually being said of our nation right now. Did you know that? There are books and studies being done in many places all over the world, including here, on the corrupting influence of our culture and our ideologies, our worldview that we're exporting to the rest of the world that, by the way, do not work for us. They don't work for us. And we're exporting it to the nations all around us who are now experiencing the same mental and emotional and societal challenges and breakdowns that we and our children are sunk deep in, but historically they have never experienced before until now. Perverting the nations, exporting a corrupting influence to the nations, ouch. And then ultimately, number 7, destroying the world, destroying the earth. John says in Revelation 11:18, he doesn't say, the 24 elders are overheard saying this: the time has come for judging the dead and for destroying those who destroy the earth. This is Babylon. This is Babylon. Babylon stands for all that is anti-God, all that sets itself up against as an alternative to the one true God and his ways, all that destroys human life, destroys human community and the earth today. And John's message throughout these scenes and the scenes that follow, one of the hopeful and very sobering truths of Revelation is this: there will be justice. There will be justice, regardless of how things appear right now, and frankly, at times, how hopeless they appear right now. There will be justice, and that means there will be judgment. There will be judgment. When people with power abuse that power for their own ends, and they think they're immune from the consequences, they are, and they will be proven dead wrong. Whether they are abusing power and taking advantage of the weak and vulnerable in the streets of the inner city, or the corridors of political power, or the marketplace, or the church, there will be justice, which means there will be judgment. And I think we're all inclined to feel a little conflicted about that, especially as you read these scenes, what judgment actually looks like. Because on the one hand, we love justice. We love justice. I mean, that's our generation's buzzword. It used to be tolerance. Now it's like we want justice, but judgment? I mean, that kind of feels different, doesn't it? Like this is a good thing, but this kind of is not. But here's the thing. There is no justice without judgment. Judgment is the means, or you might say it is the vehicle of bringing justice where there is none. And this is easily, and I think understandably missed by us, since in our world, judgment is so often itself unjust. Isn't that true? I mean, rather than being a vehicle for justice where judgment makes wrong things right, judgment in our world, even in our system of justice, which I would say is one of the, I mean, you just read a little bit of history, friends, it is one of the best ever in the history of human beings. It is still tragically flawed. And then certainly interpersonal judgment, that judgment is often a vehicle of injustice, of making wrong things worse, which is why the revelation so counters our justice and so strongly emphasizes the unique position that God is in to actually judge. God who has acted through the Lamb with sacrificial love to save all of humanity. The unique position that God is in to bring true and honest and accurate judgment and justice. And so as the scene comes to an end, chapter 19, John hears something that's actually echoed again and again throughout Revelation. It happens a handful of times, but here as the scene ends, John hears this. I heard what sounded like the roar of a great multitude in heaven, shouting, hallelujah, salvation and glory or public acclaim and power belong to our God, for true and just are his judgments. True and just are his judgments. He has condemned the great prostitute for corrupting the earth for her adulteries. There will be justice, and that's good news. That's good news to anybody who struggles with how much pain and how much injustice there is here in Babylon on this earth. There will be justice, and there will be judgment, which is sobering news. It's sobering news because there's not just a bit of Babylon around us right now. There's actually a bit of Babylon in us, in all of us. I mean, you look at that list that we built, and there's some America in that. There has been, and we love to think of ourselves as like the good guys, and we can be. But so did they, by the way. And an honest reading of the Revelation as this community-forming document that for followers of the Lamb to become the beautiful resistance, an honest reading of it, this intersects all of us on some level. It should make all of us kind of cautious about any uncritical political loyalties we might have while we live in Babylon. And so John's final call of action in this scene, because Babylon is falling, because there will be justice and there will be judgment, chapter 18, John hears another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people. Come out of her." Quoting Jeremiah 51, "Come out of her so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes." Come out. Like, come out, get out while you can, escape, leave, come out of her and go. Where? Like, where do you escape to? I mean, Babylon is everywhere, right? I mean, you can't just move to Texas to escape Babylon. Texas is Babylon. So is California and Mexico and England and New Zealand. Babylon is everywhere we go. We can't escape it physically. And here is a call to be like Daniel, to live in Babylon and yet not be of Babylon, to see Babylon for what it really is, to recognize the Babylon in you, the ways in which we have all been socialized into the dominant culture. It is like water to a fish. It is in us and through us and all around us, and to get real honest about it, and then to find the path of beautiful resistance. The path of beautiful resistance, which, as we have said, is no easy task. This is no easy task. This is why we need each other. This is why we need this thing called church, a Jesus-following community. This is why we need to regularly gather and refocus. The pervasive, persistent tug of the dominant culture on us is exhausting. You cannot successfully fight that flow alone. And this, I think, is why we need this document. The book of Revelation, that vivid imagery that just sharpens the issues for us, that clarifies the choices that we face. You were born into Babylon, but you can't stay there. You must come out. And the Lamb, who is the world's true Lord of Lords and King of Kings, is the one who's able to lead us out of the great city and into the greater city. And that's exactly where the whole story has been going, and that's where we'll pick it up next week for the series finale. Don't miss next weekend. Let me close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, as we talk about things that may be so difficult for us to see, again, it's like water to a fish. You see it with such clarity. The ways our lives trend towards compromise, the ways that we buy into a narrative that might even feel good and right, but is against your way for human life to flourish, and you see it all. And so I just pray, as we're sitting here listening, kind of trying to track with this, that you would give each of us, as you say again and again in this document, the ears to hear what you might have wanted us to hear today, what we needed to hear. Give us the ears to hear that. Give us the wisdom to know what to do with it. And then would you give us the self-awareness and the grace and the power and the community around us to move forward into that in these next weeks. And I pray that in Jesus' name, amen. Well, hey, thanks again for being with us. Before you check out, before you turn off or leave, love to have you fill out that Connect card, which Ashley was telling you about towards the beginning of the service. You could tell us what your favorite side dish is and things like that. You might have noticed we've got a baptism coming up this weekend. If you haven't been baptized yet as a follower of Jesus, write "Baptize Me" somewhere on this card. You can also write "Serve Day" for the Abbey on this card. You can drop the card in the offering baskets on the way out, which our guest services will be holding. As you're heading out there, don't forget to stop by this table and grab a couple of these table talks to give to some neighbors. You got just a few days to do this. This is a last minute deal. You cannot wait till Friday. It'll be like no bueno. They get to have a cup of coffee on us. It's a pretty sweet deal. Grab a couple of these, pass them out. Be thinking about, grab a couple even if you're not sure who you give them to, and be praying like, God, who can I reach out to? And then while you're out in the lobby, ladies, stop by the table for the Marvelously Mary event coming up in just a couple of Tuesdays, and you can sign up for that. God bless you guys. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving, and we'll see you back next weekend for the series finale. It's going to be great.